Party in, we allow folks from the Maine Wire in, we allow anyone and anyone who wants to come and either listen or ask questions, because we believe that that's the right way for government to work, to be transparent. And so welcome, and anyone who has questions, we are more than willing to answer them.
The governor said today that some of the lawmakers were coerced into voting for the budget because of this looming government shutdown, and that a solution could have been worked out. What is your response to that?
So we have spent 5+ months working on this budget. And I think when a unanimous vote is taken out of appropriations, there are a lot of members on both sides of the aisle that respect that. So I don't believe anyone was coerced. I think everyone went home and took a long look in the mirror, looked at what it meant for them, what it meant for their communities, what it meant for the state of Maine, and people, I think, voted their conscience today and overwhelmingly supported this budget.
And I think quite the opposite happened. I think the governor was desperate to make sure that this budget didn't go forward, and that didn't happen, and he's frustrated with that. I think I listened to the debate on the floor, and I think Representative Chase, who's the lead Republican on that committee, said it very well. He's probably said it best. If we don't do this, what's next? And what is next is chaos. And I think what the full legislature did today was chose compromise and collaboration over chaos. And I think that the governor worked hard to make sure, members of his own party voted with them. But I think that every legislator really looked at this and they understood the dire consequences that would happen if we did not overturn the governor's veto.
Just, in the House Democratic Caucus, we had every single member but one choose to vote on their own for this budget. There was no arm twisting on our side. I did hear my counterpart, Ken Fredette, complaining before he voted with us about circular firing squads on that side. So if there was arm twisting, it would appear that it was over there.
Do you think any recent events, like the governor's comments last week, had any impact on the vote today?
I think so. I mean, I think that it would have passed either way. We would have overrode the governor's budget either way. But I think when you look at op-ed that was just put in by Senator Cates, Republican minority leader here in the Senate, and the conversations that I've had with folks in the Republican Party that are very disappointed and disgusted with the governor's behavior, this is a beginning of seeing a separation, I think, between the governor and lessons learned in 2012. And they lost their majority because of this governor. And they're looking towards the next election, and they want to make sure that they don't remain in the minority. And they are making calculated decisions of when and how to separate themselves from the governor. And there's no better time when the stakes are so high in a public way to start separating themselves from this governor that operates from the margins and the extremes.
This governor will continue to isolate himself if he continues to lash out at his own members as well as Democratic leadership. That's clear. His erratic behavior is causing him to be isolated, and it's his own behavior that's causing that.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think everyone up here has thick skin, but what's challenging for me, and I think it's challenging for all of us, when we go home and get a cup of coffee next to somebody in the gas station, wherever we are, and, whether you know the person or not, everyone's talking about the disappointment and concern that the negative impacts the governor's having on the state. From a perception standpoint, from a business standpoint, from just the state's well-being. I think that's the biggest issue. We can handle the rhetoric up here, but when we talk about our economy, talk about the state of Maine and our reputation, why should we have that going on? It's bad. Bad news, and it sets a terrible, terrible level of discourse for the state, and it's something that Mainers should not stand for.
In a press conference that the governor just concluded downstairs, he categorized the 125th accomplishments as 2 steps forward for the state, and the veto of the budget this morning as 3 steps back. Would any of you care to respond to that?
So when we look at the first session and look at the accomplishments that we've had together as a legislature, I have a hard time understanding the governor's characterization. I mean, we are now got a budget that's a balanced budget, that's a fair and responsible budget. We have on the cusp some major policy around energy.
We've done great work around education. We've got super close and have done stuff around healthcare with PL90 and expanding healthcare. I mean, I don't know how you can't look at the range of accomplishments that we've done in a bipartisan manner and say we've taken any steps back. The entire legislature, in my opinion, has looked at how do we move the state forward. And that's not even talking about things like the Joint Select Committee and the investments that we're making in our community colleges and rural workers. I mean, I think that we will go back to our communities and people will look at our work and say, thank you, and this is going to make a difference in our lives, and then they'll talk sadly about the distractions of the governor.
Which is not to say that there's not work that still remains to be done. Some of that, by the way, is cleaning up some of the damage that was done by the last legislature. I mean, we put some money back for early childhood, Head Start, but we have not fully restored anywhere near the total cuts made to Head Start, home visitation, child care subsidies that were made in the last legislature. And that's a real pity, because that's our seed corn, that's our investment in the future. You know, we to get this budget passed, we had to give on tax fairness. We had to give on the tax cuts for the wealthy that were passed by the last legislature. So those go into statute. So there are things that remain to be done, but I think what the Senate President referred to is only the tip of the iceberg, and really just, you know, great accomplishments made by this legislature.
The reality, Andy, was that the people of the state of Maine didn't think that the 125th went 2 steps ahead, obviously, by overturning both bodies of the legislature. That was the only vote that they had. I expect in 2014, the governor might get another surprise.
The governor also was unaware that the House had overturned the energy omnibus bill that the Senate's going to be taking up later. And if I remember right, the House really took that one up well. How do you expect it to go in the Senate tonight? Do you think we'll see an equally strong support for the override?
I think the real challenge in the Senate right now is, frankly, the governor really trying to go against everything that he claims he's for in terms of predictable business climate, in terms of certainty and investments in the state and attracting capital. And I'm referring specifically to Stat Oil and opportunities for over $200 million of investment in this state. The governor wants to turn around a contract, turn around an opportunity to create a new industry, an industry that you may compare to potentially Maine's Google or Maine's Apple. And it's very frustrating. And he said he is not a supporter of wind. He said he's not a supporter of ocean energy, and it's very frustrating. And we're trying to craft a compromise, but the energy bill is very important, and we need to put that in place too. But he's willing to, I guess, see both of those go away. The need to expand natural gas, as well as the need for $200 million of investments and the potential for thousands of jobs, a new industry. That's what we're working on right now, and I'm hoping we can resolve both issues.
Some of the Republicans have been talking about possible avenues to repealing the tax increases that were voted in today on the sales and meals and lodging taxes, perhaps before the end of the biennium, if other avenues pick up. Does your caucus have any desire or see any path towards repealing those tax increases before the end of the biennium, through a supplemental budget or anything like that?
I guess I would just start by saying that this is also the same party in the 125th that said that they would pay for the income tax cuts by the economy rebounding and recovering. And we now know, sadly, that our economy hasn't done that, and we're now paying for those tax cuts through this budget. Even though we passed it, there are many cuts that we had to make to pay for those unpaid tax cuts. So I think everyone's getting a little ahead of themselves. I think some of the Republicans are hedging their bets because they don't want to go back to their communities and haven't voted for tax increases. These are not things that Democrats were pulling for at the start. We, like Representative Berry said, one of our top priorities was to suspend those tax cuts from the 125th because they weren't paid for. It was a gimmick. The governor himself has no idea how to pay for them. Taxation members from the 125th don't know how they paid for them. No one knows how they paid for them because they weren't paid for. So that's what we pushed very, very hard. the Republicans came forth with the half a penny on the sales tax and meals and lodging as a revenue possibility for this budget. We looked at it, we said this is something we could do. It wasn't our favorite option, there were many other options we favored more, but at the end of the day, that got the budget passed in both bodies on overwhelming margins. And so, again, I think the Republicans are getting ahead of themselves by saying they're going to suspend these tax increases. I think they're trying to hedge their bets. We're not even 2 hours done of a budget being overridden, and now they're coming up with, I think, a lot of nice kind of things to go home to their constituents with, or maybe nice to put on the main wire, but at the end of the day, it's too early to tell, and the fact of the matter is, I think, when we come back in January, we're going to have to do work together, and if it means looking at different options, we will, but I think it's way too premature to be talking about rescinding tax increases before, you know, the day is even done.
As far as the income tax cuts that you just talked about that were enacted last session, to what extent do you think your constituents and voters are going to make a campaign issue out of that? What's going to be your response to them if they say, well, we wanted you to cut those, you know, repeal those income tax cuts before you did?
So, I mean, for me, when I go back to the city of Portland, I'm going to say we pushed suspending or delaying those tax cuts to the very last moment in time. And when we looked at the avenue of keep on that path, staying on that path and suspending or delaying the tax cuts, or potentially not having a budget and shutting down the state, we looked at other revenues. And it wasn't our favorite option, it wasn't our preferred option, but it was the option we had to go down to create a reasonable and better budget than what the governor put in front of us. And we will continue to fight for a better and more fair tax structure and system here in the state of Maine. But then I'd also pivot to the $40 million that we're going to be doing in a commission to look at all the tax loopholes that we have in the state of Maine. I think that is a real step forward to the state of Maine as we look at all the cuts that every other part of the state of Maine has made over the past 3 years. Why wouldn't we also look at incentives and tax increment financing and all the incentives that businesses have, and why wouldn't we look at are those still effective or not? And so I think that's another piece that I'll talk about with my constituents, you know, when I go back to my community.
It's an issue I'm passionate about too, and I think that we obviously, you know, we needed Republicans to come along in order to get this budget passed, and you know, spending or doing away with the income tax cuts, while it might have been our preferred option, was not doable now. I think people who care about taxpayers deeply, as we should, we all want to grow the economy. The best way to do that is from the middle out. Need to work hard to elect Democrats in 2014.
The governor, I don't know if you guys went here already, but maintains that his budget did not necessarily force cities and towns to raise property taxes, and that would have been a local option thing. I'm just wondering some thoughts on that. You guys felt throughout the session adamantly that those cuts to local revenue sharing weren't going to result. In other words, they weren't going to be able to find efficiencies, merge services, or reduce spending, or if they wanted to, then they'd have to raise taxes as a last resort, is how the governor put it just a few minutes ago.
So I think most people would agree that doesn't even pass the straight face test in terms of what the governor is saying. We heard on the floor debate, Republicans talk about, they knew, for those that supported overriding the governor's veto, they talked publicly on the floor about it was either a property tax increase in a way that is not sustainable for people, particularly on fixed incomes, or it's the responsible budget that we have now. So I just think that, you know, what the governor is saying in terms of laying it at the feet of the municipalities doesn't even pass the straight face test, and Republicans will tell you the same thing.
The governor also, sorry, go ahead.
I would just ask the governor, how many municipalities came to support his budget? 0. How many municipalities wrote to our legislature saying that they have taken votes, public votes, rejecting the budget? Over 70. And just ask him for the facts. This guy is full of rhetoric. He's full of his ideology, and it's sad. It's sad on a day where he could just be quiet and understand that his party and Democrats came together to pass a budget overwhelmingly. That he just can say, you know what, I've lost this, and move on. But unfortunately, he can't, and of course, the facts don't match what he's saying at all. So it doesn't pass the straight face test, which is really, really unfortunate that he keeps misleading the state of Maine over and over.
Yeah, I've also complained or voiced some concern about leadership in the House from the Republican side, and mentioned Representative Fredette by name, said something to the effect that he wasn't around to talk to him about this budget. And I just would wonder your perspective about your Republican colleagues and how they were negotiating on this budget.
So I think that the governor continues to lose credibility when he goes out after people like Ken Fredette, who's probably been one of his biggest allies, and who's tried to bridge relationships with the governor and members of the House. And I think to go out and say, you know, that Ken Fredette had not been available, you know, that's not being accurate. You know, Ken Fredette meets with him, he's available. The governor, as other people have said, could meet with any of us. You know, it's his willingness to meet with us. He's hardly ever in the building anymore. He's absent. You know, it's hard enough for you folks to see him. It's hard enough for us to get a meeting. He didn't show up to the meeting that these folks had scheduled with him. So to go out and say we're not meeting with him, or that Ken Fredette's not talking to him about the budget, you know, it just doesn't pass the straight face test. I think back home, he's losing credibility. You know, our select board in Skowhegan, those are members of the Republican Party. You know, when he goes back, talks about cutting revenue sharing, says it's not a tax increase, you know, they recognize that, they don't back that. I talked with a city council member from Pittsfield, and they agreed. They just think that the governor's sort of lost touch. You could go back and look at when the governor did his YouTube video railing against the Baldacci administration for cuts to revenue sharing. It just does not add up. He does not go from point A to point B. He bounces around, he makes stuff up, he uses rhetoric. We're dealing with facts, and we're willing to work with other people and come up with compromise, and then the governor does his thing and has his rhetoric.
I just want to say, I think there's certain leaders and members of the Republican Party that deserve a lot of credit for joining with us to work together. Some of you specifically were there late at night on that last day. A journey that we began in early March. 300 people testified, it was 356 publicly. Hours and hours of hearings. And in those closing hours, Representative Fredette specifically, along with Senator Cates and other members of leadership, were with all of us downstairs in appropriations, trying to resolve this, working together. So it's unfortunate. We're doing our job. We're doing what the people sent us here to do, and I think that people deserve credit for that.
The overall thing is the governor is the ultimate sore loser. If you look in the dictionary, his picture would be there, because I've never seen anyone that will flip, you know, the actual reality, what's going on, quicker than he does.
And I just have to follow up with what Senator Goodall said, and Senator Jackson, in where the credit is due. I think we all worked really hard in a very bipartisan way to get to where we are. The comments that Representative Fredette said on the floor of the House were great, and they were honest. And he spoke from experience that he's had as a member of the minority party working with a governor that is, again, works on the margins. And I think that today's a really hard day for the governor. It's starting to become clear that he's irrelevant. And it's very hard to come to that acknowledgement when your own party won't stand with you. And I think, again, going back to my earlier comments of today being a day that we're starting to see that separation, you know, for good reasons politically, for our Republican colleagues to do that. So, again, it's frustrating to be irrelevant, but I think that's the path that the governor's on.
Going forward, are there any changes you can make in terms of how you work with the governor, trying to improve this relationship at all?
I mean, we'll continue meeting with the governor, we'll continue meeting with the governor's staff. I mean, I don't think it's a bad relationship at all. We go down there, we have meetings with the senior staff. They're fine meetings. I think we just have different agendas and different expectations of what we want to do in our time on the 126. When we don't get what we want, we look for solutions. We try to figure out and problem solve and try to get to a good end result. And we all can see over and over what the governor does when he doesn't get his way. So, you know, we're going to continue working with the governor, we're continue working with the staff, continue working with our Republican legislators, because that's what Mainers expect us to do. It's pretty simple. You come up here, you get work done. You're not going to get everything that you want, but you better get stuff done, because Mainers expect it, and frankly, that's why I think Mainers believe and come out to vote as much as they do in every election, because we're not like Washington, D.C., we're not like other states that things don't get done. And I think when you look at the 126, people are going to say a lot of stuff got done in divided government with the governor that clearly has shown over and over his willingness to compromise is zero.
We have time for one more question.
Do you see Governor LePage finishing this term? We've heard that the only reason he didn't resign is he doesn't want to see the Senate President become governor.
I don't think we're going to buy comment on that.
One more real question then?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I just wanted to talk about, I know we had, I think the governor passed 50 vetoes either today or yesterday. You know, mostly more minor things that you guys have been talking about here. Just kind of wanted to, you guys probably touched on this while I was either off the phone or not, but do you think it's just, and compare, you know, when you also add on his comments today about Representative Fredette, do you just think it's a pattern where he doesn't like, you know, government that isn't directed by him?
He doesn't like it unless people are kneeling before him and agreeing with what he wants. I mean, today's comments or last week's comments weren't, I mean, and that's the difference. I mean, most of us in this body, Republican and Democrat, know that you have to work with people. I mean, you're not going to get everything you want all the time. The governor just, I mean, you can't even disagree with what he has to say. So, I mean, that's just not the way that I've ever seen anywhere work, a business, you know, a workplace, certainly not state government. I mean, people are going to disagree, and when they do, many times they come up with a better product, and that's what my experience has always been. But I mean, the governor just continues. If you disagree with him, you are definitely on a blacklist or a black heart list.
You know, I think one thing to look at is for the governor and the way he behaves and treats people. You wouldn't be able to treat people that way in the private sector or the public sector in a supervisory role. You know, and that's one thing that I think people back home really understand, and they agree. Regardless of where you work, you don't treat people that you work with in the way that he does. You know, there's folks like Senator Flood, Senator Cates, Representative Fredette. I'm more than willing to work with those people. I'm not going to agree with them 100% of the time, probably not even half the time. But they're leaders, they're reasonable, they're willing to come to the table, they're willing to talk, they're willing to disagree and then come back to the table. And I think we just see no leadership from the governor.
I would just add too, on the veto messages, it seems like, you know, many of the bills haven't really been read clearly. There's misinformation in some of those veto messages. Many of them were unanimous out of committee or went unanimously through the bodies, and